I'm Andrea with Education Elements, and I just wanted to pop in for some quick tips and tricks on how to leverage leadership during these times of crisis. So we know that we're in an unprecedented time. People keep on using that word, and it's true. We don't know exactly what's going to happen next and what decisions are right. We're making a lot of choices between imperfect decisions. And something that's really come up in a lot of the discussions that I've had with folks is the importance of leadership during this time. So I wanted to share a few tips and tricks that we've learned along the way about leading through crisis and leveraging your best leaders during this time. So I put this image together to share a little bit more about our approach. So when we think about teams at Education Elements, we think that they're dynamic, they change based on the needs, based on the projects that come up, and they're not always the same. So I want to share the example for strategic planning. When we think of a strategic plan, we know that there are layers of people who are invested and who want to give feedback, input, make decisions. So we've created, and the image is included here, a layer of teams. So we have a project team that leads the logistics, manages the plan, makes sure that we have all of our meetings and are ready to go. And then we have a steering team. Those are the folks who are charged with making the big decisions and making sure that these projects happen. We have planning teams. Those are the people who are highly invested but don't need to come to all the steering committee meetings. They can provide recommendations. And then we have advisors, people who pop in and out. So those might not be the exact teams that you need for a certain project, but we think it gives a good idea. And I think the thing that we've learned the most out of this is two things. One, you need layers of leadership. So not everybody should be weighing in on every decision that you're making. And the second piece is you have to have a feedback loop. You should at least run it by a few different layers or a few different groups of people to see what decisions make the most sense for you. And finally, I think it's important to have a very clear purpose for your team so that you can match the right people to each team. So that kind of moves into what we can do during this time. So I'm going to use our models of teams, but you might have other teams that have been highly successful. The way we could repurpose our team is asking a few different questions. Who within our teams are able to work very quickly? Which teams have operated well with ambiguity? And who needs to make key decisions? So who do we need to be invested through this process? So for us, that might mean we repurpose that project team to make sure that they're leading a lot of this crisis management. There also might be a few people who have more long-term interest that you involve as well, but they might be your project team, might be your core group of people who get things done and organize the rest of the groups. The next thing we lean on is our new school rules. Number 3, define the work before defining the people. So our CEO, Anthony Kim, and Alexis Gonzalez-Black wrote a book called The New School Rules, where we talk about ways to be agile and dynamic in a changing world. And I think this is a perfect time to incorporate that rule. So we have to define what the work is before we enlist the people. We're often tempted to bring in people because their title might imply that they need to be involved in a certain decision. And that might certainly be the case, but you want to make sure you're clear on what decisions you're bringing that person in for. So just because of a title doesn't mean that we have to incorporate every single person into a certain conversation. So we like to define the things that need to get done and then make sure we align the right people to those. So how is this relevant for COVID-19 needs? What I've seen with the districts that I work with is that there are 3 different buckets that people are thinking about. There's the short-term implication. So how do we get meals to students who need them? How do we deploy devices? How do we give internet access to every student? And those needs need to be met right away. Those are immediate needs. They come up day to day as information is changing, and there's certainly a need for that because you plan for those emergency situations. There's a medium-term need to think about what happens between now and the end of the school year. So around this time, most states have announced that they're not going to be coming back in person for the rest of the school year. So how do we finish out the school year strong with the requirements that are expected, such as graduation, locker cleanup, teachers getting their materials, students previewing their next grade, all of those things that are not emergencies that are popping up, but that we can anticipate. So how do we think about that medium term? And then long term, what are we going to do when we come back? When are we going to come back? What are the implications of this of COVID-19 on students' social emotional needs? How are we going to be addressing the gaps that students have? So that is part of that NSR Rule 3, thinking about what work we have. If you can bucket them into short, medium, and long-term needs, you might be able to create different teams and deploy your project team members to lead them. So in the short term, you might have an emergency COVID response team to address all of the short-term needs, and you build your team accordingly. In the medium term, you might realize those decisions can be made by school leaders and they can collaborate. So you might leverage an existing structure. And then finally, we might need to develop a group for a reentry plan. So thinking about who from the project team needs to be involved, how will those project teams connect with the short, medium term teams, and make sure that everyone's on the same page and communicating. The last thing I'll say is it's really important to be clear on dividing these roles, because you want to make sure that people aren't doubling efforts and doing the same thing over and over again. I highly encourage you to think about the leaders who have been responding really well during this crisis and who you can lean on. This isn't really a time to build a lot of consensus, but it is a time to take quick, small actions, communicate and receive the feedback, and use your loop a lot faster. So make sure you reach out with any questions that you have. I hope to hear stories about how you leverage leadership in your community.